First impressions are important. If we didn't have good ones, then we'd all end up forever alone, and that's not completely untrue for video games. See, a good first impression can be the difference between you sinking hundreds of hours into the next big thing, or deciding you'd rather walk a marathon on a road made of Lego than play another minute. So today I wanted to talk about what makes a good video game opening, and what some of my favourite ones are. Oh, and hey, if we've made a good first impression so far, then please do consider hitting the subscribe button, as it definitely helps. So without further ado, let's begin talking about beginnings. A good opening sequence in a video game should do one of three things, in my opinion. And a great opening will do two of these things. A perfect one would nail all three of them. We'll start with the most obvious thing. A game should be entertaining and engaging in its opening. It should hook you. And you'd think this would be a given, but there's a fair amount of games out there that apparently didn't get the memo. Obviously, a good opening has atmosphere, and it draws you into its world. Doom 2016 is an incredible experience throughout, but the opening goes crazy, honestly. You awaken in a daze in a seemingly unfamiliar situation before being guided by Samuel Hayden.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Samuel Hayden. I'm the head of this facility.
Someone who should be feared and respected, and yet he spends this entire opening sequence apologizing to the Slayer for the clearly out of control situation you now find yourself in.
I think we can work together and resolve this problem in a way that benefits us both.
It's fantastic because this immediately frames just how scary you are as a character. This super important and deeply unsettling man is scared of you, apologizing to you. The whole situation is tense, full of action, and feels very dangerous, but it really isn't that bad, and so it does a great job of making you feel like this insanely powerful being that is the Doomslayer. This is all topped off by a moment where you get into a lift and listen to Hayden try to reason with you.
I'm willing to take full responsibility for the horrible events of the last 24 hours, but you must understand, our interest in their world was purely for the betterment of mankind.
Perfectly timed, with Google getting so frustrated that he crushes the communicator as a fucking incredible music kicks in to let you know that you're in for one hell of a ride.
But it was worth the risk, I assure you.
Dark Souls 2, on the other hand, is a much slower experience, but one that definitely complements the game you're about to play. See, Dark Souls 2 may be regarded as the weakest of the Souls series, but I do think its opening at least is the strongest of the three. The opening cinematic feels much more personal and smaller in scope than Dark Souls 1. It explains the context of the world through our protagonist's situation, rather than this broad overview. That situation being that they are an undead and destined to turn hollow. The CGI here is really good, honestly, and the imagery and more personally focused narrative here creates for a much more engaging hook than the other Souls games. I mean, look at this.
Like a moth drawn to a flame, your wings will burn in anguish.
Also, every old woman you meet in this intro, and there's a lot of them for some reason, really hammers in just how utterly fucked you are.
You're finished. You'll go hollow.
And combined with the incredibly dark starting area, the dread of your situation is really hard to ignore. And speaking of, this starting area, Things Betwixt, it's so visually striking the way everything exists in this dark void and uses light and flame as a way to guide the player without just telling them. I mean, look, you're immediately drawn to the bright fire coming from this house. You're then given a torch, which of course incentivizes you to light all the torches down the coming path. And this will then railroad you into some tutorial rooms which explain the game's basics, but also makes them completely optional if you already know what's here, because you can just sprint past all of this and beeline it to the game's hub world, which, oh my god, the hub world. I could write an entire video on Majula. I still don't know how to say this. I'm just going to call it Majula. If I get it wrong, I get it wrong. Anyway, yeah, I could write an entire video on Majula alone. Honestly, this is such a fantastically designed area from every angle, but for now, I'll just say that being guided by fire throughout things betwixt, just to be met with, I believe, the warmest looking environment in the game is perfection, and the calm yet dilapidated state of the town gives immediate insight into the quest you're about to take on. It's somber, everything lays in ruin, the people here are depressed, and yet in this world, this is your beacon of hope. This is what passes for positivity. It's genius. Okay, so we've covered entertaining and engaging, but what's next? Well, the next thing a game's opening should do is introduce the game's mechanics in a fun and ideally subtle way that doesn't really feel like you're playing a tutorial mission. Now, Forza is not normally a series that I would be that into, but Forza Horizon 4 did this so well in the intro that when I played it on Game Pass, I was hooked and decided to buy the game on Steam to keep. And yeah, I'd love to show you that intro now, but yeah, that happens. Anyway, when the game does boot up, you're met with this fantastic interactive intro which takes you up and down the luscious landscapes you'll be visiting throughout the game. It even has the seasons pass as you speed through rural England, to give you a sneak peek at the game's main gimmick, the season system, which drastically affects which type of car you'll want to use when racing due to the different weather conditions that each season brings. And to top it all off, the entire sequence is one big race. It's honestly really clever. You get a good feel of the controls, a fantastic sense of speed and adrenaline, an immediate taste of all the weather gimmicks and visual variety the game has to offer, and the satisfaction of competing in a race the moment the game starts. It's quick, it's simple, and it lays out the game's primary mechanics right in front of you. But in my incredibly biased opinion, there's one game that introduces its mechanics up front even better, and that game is Sonic Adventure 2. City Escape is such an iconic first level that most people forget that it's not even necessarily the first level you'll play. You can fully choose to play the Dark Story first, and if you do, your first impression of this game will instead come from Iron Gate. But you know, if you pick Dark Story first on your first ever playthrough, then you're a psycho, so you probably deserve it. After a very short and to the point cutscene which establishes well the current scenario, you're thrown into a high-speed chase through a bustling city area, which the devs did a fantastic job of making feel so alive and populated despite the technology at the time. I mean, seriously, there's barely any open-endedness here, and not a single civilian appears in this level, yet it feels incredibly grounded and real to me. It's one of the most believable locales in a Sonic game to date, in my opinion. But atmosphere aside, this stage is fast. You start off zooming downhill on a part of the helicopter Sonic just ripped off, and then you find yourself spending the entire stage avoiding guns, Sonic's version of the FBI. The thing is, despite these intense implications, this is again a very safe stage and introduces you to everything new about Sonic without neglecting the old. There's your rings and your homing attack chains, item boxes, everything you know and loved from Sonic Adventure 1, but there's also lots of construction barriers which serve as a perfect obstacle to introduce you to the new somersault maneuver. It's perfectly immersed into the environment, and because the somersault happens when you tap the B button, you're going to figure out pretty quickly that you can do it even if you do miss the almost out hit. There's also grinding. You may have noticed that this game, starting in a city environment, is a far cry from the beaches and green hills that Sonic had been started out from up until now, and I think grinding is probably the main reason why. It was a very new mechanic at the time, and the devs needed to make sure that you had lots of time to experiment with it in a safe environment, and a city full of railings is perfect for that. Again, they blend seamlessly into the world, but they are a bright enough red that they catch your eye, and the first few you see are dead in the middle of the path, meaning Sonic will likely snap onto them, and voila, now you know that's the thing, but it's okay if you suck at it right now because there's plenty of floor underneath you. This is all topped off with an exhilarating chase sequence and some of the most iconic tunes in gaming. All gearing up to let you know that you're in for a fast-paced, action-filled time. Then you go treasure hunting, but it sets up Sonic Stage as well, at least. The third good thing that an opening can do is quickly and concisely introduce a character. Jumping into the world of film for a second, Jack Sparrow has, I believe, one of the greatest character introductions of all time. The triumphant music playing as Jack stands proud, wind blowing in his face as he sails the seas, only for the camera to pull out and reveal he's at the very top of a sinking ship, which he calmly walks off of as it pulls into port. The camera pull here perfectly conveys that this is a man who is a legend in his own head only. When wrapped in his own thoughts, he's a fierce and prideful pirate, but if you take a step back, you'll notice he's a ridiculous man with far too much confidence, chance and a little bit of luck. And now the reason I jumped to movies for a second there is because this type of opening applies mostly to story-heavy games. I mean, no one needs a character introduction to Mario the Italian plumber whose vocal range stops at.
That's so nice!
Portal 2, on the other hand, did have to introduce a new character, Wheatley, and they did it perfectly. Aside from the fact Stephen Merchant is perfectly cast as the character, the expressiveness they got out of a floating metal eyeball is admirable, and the writing is fantastic.
Are you going to open this door? Because it's fairly urgent. Oh, just open the door! That's too aggressive. Hello, friend. Why not open the door? Hola, amigo. Abre la puerta. Donde está? No,
From the moment he knocks on your door, his voice reeks of urgency, but also someone who clearly has no experience in demanding authority. The message is clear. He's not very good at this. He rambles, he tells you to do things like hold on, but clarifies it's up to you if you don't want to. He says things to try and calm you down that ultimately just make things way worse. You know everything you need to know about this character within 5 minutes of gameplay. Borderlands 2 is a similar case, although in this instance they introduce the villain and 4 protagonists entirely within a 3-minute cinematic with absolutely no dialogue, and that's really impressive. Here we're introduced to our team of Vault Hunters who enter the scene by slamming a train into some psychos. It's incredible. The music kicks in at just the right time, and we see handsome Jack propaganda that appears positive at first and swiftly becomes sinister, giving us a perfect insight into his showmanship as a villain and the sort of man we're dealing with. And this is all before the Vault Hunters start picking off enemies one by one, and their personalities are portrayed perfectly through their fighting styles here. It's quick, it's efficient, and it really sets the wacky and chaotic tone of the game. Now, as I mentioned at the start, in an ideal world, a game does all 3 of these things, and whilst it's not often that it happens, I do think occasionally some games nail it. For me, no game has struck the balance of all 3 quite as well as Marvel's Spider-Man on PS4. I'm a big Spider-Man fan, so there's most likely some bias here, but I think this is still a really damn good opening to a video game, Spider-Man fan or not. We see lots of photos of his friends and family. He's obviously someone who values relationships. We see a lot of clutter, stacks of books, circuit boards, sketches and designs, a cracked laptop, coffee mug stains. This is the home of someone who is busy, so busy that they neglect their own well-being. We see web shooters and a work-in-progress Spider-Man mask. We now know for sure this is Spider-Man's apartment. We see a ton of news clippings of crime Spider-Man has stopped, as well as articles on villains still at large. Fisk being one that's very prominent. We can see not just how proud he is of his work as Spider-Man, but how determined he is to finish what he started, and we can tell from this that he's been Spider-Man for some time now. We see a ton of post-it notes, and they all cover a wide range of topics, again reinforcing that he's so busy he needs to write absolutely everything down to have any chance of remembering it. But this also gives us an insight into the funnier side of his personality. He has those reminding him to play a prank, his rent reminder is spelt exaggerated, he tells himself to do his own laundry by name, pokes fun at himself for needing another loan extension, and refers to his own ideas as either good or great, not bad. And finally, they reinforce how much he values his relationships here. Amongst all this important superhero work, he still has notes about picking up his aunt and finding out Yuri's birthday. He prioritizes his loved ones over his severe debt, reducing it to the size of post-it notes that he can easily ignore, reinforcing the constant internal battle of being drawn between 2 lives. Fisk Tower is under siege from the police, and he cooks and eats his breakfast as he's getting changed into his costume. He then ignores another late rent letter that slides under his door, giving us our first slightly more serious look into just how he disregards his own life in favor of doing his work as Spider-Man. And we get this fantastic heroic shot of Spider-Man surrounded by a very unheroic, tiny, messy apartment. It's a perfect character introduction. Then, with no loading screens, he seamlessly dives out of the window, the music ramps up, and you're swinging through New York alongside a police car on your way to take down Fisk. The character is introduced flawlessly, the atmosphere sets the tone for the world and the story you're about to embark on. You're fully engaged because of how seamlessly the gameplay started. All that's left is the introduction to the game's mechanics, and the game nails that too. It starts you off with this exhilarating swing to your location before you mount your attack on Fisk Towers, which is already in the middle of a siege. Just like City Escape, you're introduced to the game's mechanics, which in this case is the combat system, in a safe environment that feels dangerous and intense. You're surrounded by flames and crashed cars, bullets flying everywhere. It's very exciting, but ultimately not that dangerous. And the assault on the tower itself is very cleverly designed. You fight all the basic enemy types, giving you a good taste of the variety the game offers, but without introducing all of them too early, so there's still some surprises later on. You do some climbing up lift shafts to teach you wall crawling, use your spider sense to find a vent you can sneak through, letting you know to keep an eye out for those, and you perform some stealth takedowns. Now you know that's an option as well. The game even throws some really easy to land environmental hazards in for you to try out, again setting a standard for the rest of the game that becomes slightly harder as you go on. You also get to do some visually interesting quick-time events that replicate classic Spider-Man comic panels, and this is a great little homage for the fans that's still cool even if you miss it. And it tops this all off with a boss fight with the Kingpin himself, one that teaches you the power of throwing environmental objects at enemies and using your web shots to incapacitate stronger enemies. Finally, the game leaves you with an interesting thought from Kingpin that can't help but linger in your head as he's hauled off to prison.
I'm the one who kept order in this city! 1 month! In 1 month you'll wish you had me back!
Spider-Man's opening moments perfectly capture what makes a great opening to a video game to me, and by the time this video goes out, you'll likely be enjoying Spider-Man 2 as well, so let's hope that lives up to the amazing standard that the beginning of the first game certainly set.
Oh boy, yeah.
Open the bed. Break you in, then